He barely touched him. I'm telling you, he barely made contact. And Blassie just went backward like something invisible hit him hard. I was sitting maybe 15 feet away. I saw everything clearly. That smaller guy held Blassie's wrist. And suddenly he just couldn't move. A man weighing over 200 pounds, completely stuck, unable to pull his own arm free. Even now, I can't explain how that happened. On October 14th, 1971, about 14 seconds of live television quietly vanished from American history. Within 2 days, the original tape was removed from ABC's archives. The delayed broadcast on the West Coast aired a cut version. No explanation was given. No statement to the media. Years later, during an internal audit in 1986, a short note surfaced. Just 2 words were listed as the reason: content concerns. I've only told this story a few times over the years. Most people don't believe it. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince them. But I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. The Dick Cavett Show aired regularly from a studio on West 58th Street in Manhattan. Cavett was known for bringing together unusual combinations of guests. Scholars, comedians, athletes, and musicians all shared the same space. But on that particular evening, 2 very different personalities were booked together, and they probably should never have crossed paths. One was a 30-year-old martial artist from Hong Kong, just starting to gain attention in the United States. Bruce Lee. The other was a 43-year-old professional wrestler from St. Louis, known for his loud personality and sharp tongue, Freddie Blassie. What happened between them was witnessed by millions watching live. But soon after, the original footage was gone. At that time, Bruce Lee wasn't yet the global icon people would later recognize. He hadn't made Enter the Dragon, and his worldwide fame hadn't fully arrived. But in late 1971, he was very close to it. He had just completed work on Long Street, playing a martial arts instructor who trained a blind investigator. It was a small role, but the reaction was strong. Viewers kept asking about him. They replayed his scenes. They wanted to know who he was. Lee had been in Hollywood before, playing Kato in The Green Hornet, but that show didn't last long. After that, he struggled with limited roles. The industry didn't know where to place him. But by 1971, things were starting to shift. His presence was getting noticed, and opportunities were slowly opening up. Someone at ABC thought it would be a great idea to bring him onto the Dick Cavett Show. He was confident, well-spoken, and had a unique physical ability that caught people's attention instantly. It made sense for television. What they didn't fully consider was who else would be sitting next to him. Freddie Blassie was already a big name. He was famous not just for wrestling, but for the way he spoke. His entire style was built on provoking people. He insulted audiences directly, called them names, and made it entertaining. He even popularized a phrase that stuck around for years: pencil neck geek. Blassie always believed he was the toughest man in the room. And if someone disagreed, he would make sure they heard about it. This wasn't just an act for the camera, it was who he was. All the time. So, when he heard he'd be sharing the stage with a martial artist who could supposedly break bricks and move faster than most people could react, he didn't take it seriously. The show was recorded in the early evening, in a small studio with a few cameras and a live audience of around 200 people. Bruce Lee arrived around 4:30 p.m., dressed simply in a dark suit, calm and composed. Not knowing what kind of moment was about to unfold, a production assistant later remembered that Bruce Lee stayed mostly quiet before the show began. He was polite, calm, and focused, spending most of his time in the green room doing slow, controlled stretches that almost looked like a kind of quiet, flowing dance. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Freddie Blassie arrived about 45 minutes later, and everything changed instantly. He was loud the moment he walked through the door, confident, almost overwhelming. He wore a cream-colored suit with a gold tie that caught the light, and his silver hair was slicked neatly back. He shook hands a little too hard, called one of the stagehands "kid," even though the man was clearly older, and casually asked where the bourbon was. When someone told him there was only coffee, he just laughed, like it didn't matter. The 2 men didn't meet before the taping. That was how Dick Cavett preferred it. He believed the first real interaction should happen on camera, where everything felt more natural and more real. After the opening monologue, Cavett introduced his first guest. Bruce Lee walked out with a steady, unhurried stride. His movements were precise, almost effortless. The applause was polite, warm, but not overwhelming. Most of the audience only had a vague idea of who he was at that time, honestly, at first glance. He didn't stand out much, just a smaller, quiet man in a simple suit. Nothing about him suggested what was coming next. Cavett started with basic questions. How did you begin martial arts? What does your philosophy mean? Lee answered calmly, clearly, with a quiet confidence. He spoke about martial arts as a form of self-expression, about adaptability, about understanding movement and energy. And slowly, the audience leaned in. There was something about the way he spoke, calm but powerful. Then Cavett said, "Let me bring out my next guest." Freddie Blassie walked onto the stage the same way he entered every room, like he owned it completely. He didn't wait for the introduction to finish. He dropped onto the couch heavily, making it shift under his weight. A big man, around 6'1", over 230 pounds, carrying the solid, worn strength of years in the ring. He looked at Bruce Lee, then at the audience. Then back at Lee again? "This is the guy?" he said. Some people laughed, but something in the room shifted. You could feel it. Blassie leaned back, spreading his arms across the couch like he was settling into his territory. "What I want to know is, what exactly does he do?" he said. "Because from where I'm sitting, he looks like he barely weighs anything." More laughter. Still light, but changing. Bruce Lee smiled slightly, small, controlled. "I weigh about 140 pounds, he said calmly. "But I appreciate the extra." This time the laughter was warmer. The audience was starting to like him, but Blassie waved it off. 140? 130? "What's the difference?" he said. "I've got ears heavier than that." Cavett stepped in, trying to guide things. "Freddie, you've been wrestling for over 20 years, right?" 23, Blassie corrected immediately. 23 years of being the greatest wrestler on the face of this earth. And in all that time, I've never met a man who could make me quit. Then he turned toward Lee. "And you? You even follow wrestling?" Lee tilted his head slightly. "I've seen it," he said. "The athleticism is worth watching." "There you go." Blassie pointed at him. "Even he agrees." But Lee didn't change his tone. "I said the athleticism is worth watching," he repeated calmly. "I didn't say anything about the fighting." That line changed everything. It wasn't loud, but you could feel it. Blassie sat up slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. Lee stayed relaxed. "It means what it sounds like," he said. "Wrestling requires strength, discipline, and conditioning." "I respect that. But there is a difference between performing for an audience and actually fighting." Now the room got quieter. Blassie stared at him. "Performing?" he repeated. "You think this is a performance?" Lee paused briefly, choosing his words carefully. "In my films," he said, "the fights are planned, but at least the audience knows that." The reaction wasn't explosive, but it was noticeable. The attention in the room tightened. It's important to understand something here. Blassie wasn't foolish. He was sharp. He understood people better than most. Within seconds, he could tell Bruce Lee wasn't like anyone he had dealt with before. But Blassie didn't adjust. He never adjusted. That was his identity. And now, in front of millions watching, he had just been told that everything he built his reputation on wasn't real. He leaned forward. His voice dropped, heavier now. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I've been doing this longer than you've been around. I've broken bones. I've taken real hits. You're gonna sit there and tell me that's not real?" Lee didn't move. "The pain may be real," he said quietly, "but the outcome is decided before it begins." "That is the difference." Blassie's jaw tightened. "And your kung fu movies are more real than that?" Lee shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I'm saying they're more honest." Cavett tried to shift things. Asked about shows, matches, anything else. But it was already too late. The room was locked on them. Blassie pointed at Lee again. You know what your problem is? He said. You've never been in a real fight. You've been in movies. Demonstrations. But never across from a man who actually wants to hurt you. Lee answered calmly. I have been in fights. Against who? Blassie pushed. Guys your size? Lee looked directly at him. Against men trying to prove something, he said. Blassie laughed loudly. I don't need to prove anything, he said. I'm Freddie Blassie. And at that moment, you could feel something building even stronger. What I need, Blassie said, leaning forward slightly, is for guys like you to stop going on television and disrespecting a business you don't understand? I understand enough, Bruce Lee replied calmly. Blassie narrowed his eyes. Yeah? What exactly do you understand? This time, Lee didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the host. He looked directly at Blassie. I understand that wrestling requires real strength, he said. No one here is questioning that. But strength alone has its limits? There was a pause. Then he added, slowly and clearly, a man who relies only on strength is like someone swinging a heavy sword, without an edge. The room shifted, not because of volume, not because of drama, because of how he said it. It didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like a simple fact. Calm, direct, almost undeniable. And for the first time, Blassie didn't answer immediately. His mouth opened slightly like a response was forming, but it didn't come out right away. His hands rested on his knees, his breathing just a little heavier than before. Something had changed. Later, Dick Cavett would describe that exact moment in an interview. There's a certain feeling, he said, when two people are about to cross a line, and I could feel it. I've had thousands of guests, but this was different. Neither of them was going to step back. Blassie finally spoke again, his voice tighter now. You know what, Bruce? He said, philosophy doesn't block a punch, and looking good on camera doesn't help when the camera's off. He leaned in a little more. You perform in front of cameras that can do another take. So before you sit there talking about what's real, ask yourself this. When was the last time you did something where you couldn't stop it? The room stayed quiet, but Blassie wasn't. Done. He never was. He pushed further. You wouldn't last 30 seconds with me. A few people shifted in their seats. The energy was building again. Lee said nothing at first, but Blassie raised his voice slightly. You hear me? 30 seconds. I hear you, Lee said. Blassie leaned back just a bit. So what do you say to that? Lee looked at him for a moment, a long, quiet moment. Then he answered, in a voice so calm it almost felt smaller than the room itself, I think. 30 seconds is generous? That line didn't explode. It landed and stayed there. There is a recording of what happened next. But most people have never seen it. The original broadcast went out live on the East Coast. Around 11 million people were watching. What followed lasted only about 14 seconds before the director suddenly cut to commercial. Those 14 seconds were removed from every later version. No explanation. No replay. Just gone. Here's what those people saw before the screen. Change. Blassie stood up. Not casually, the way he always did in front of a crowd, shoulders forward, chin slightly raised, taking up space, making himself feel bigger and standing there. The difference between them was obvious. Blassie was taller by a few inches, heavier by nearly 100 pounds. From the outside, it looked completely one-sided. Why don't you stand up? Blassie said. His voice had changed now. Less performance. More direct. Come on, Bruce. You've been talking all night. Show us what you mean? Bruce Lee stood up, but the way he stood was different. There was no visible effort. No push, no shift, no build-up. One moment he was sitting, the next moment he was already standing, the kind of movement most people don't even notice, but athletes do. Cavett tried to step in. Gentlemen, let's... Neither of them reacted. Blassie moved forward. In wrestling, that was the first step. Close the distance. Apply presence. Make the other person feel your size. He had done it for years, and it always worked. He reached out toward Lee's shoulder. Lee didn't step back. He moved slightly to the side. Just a few inches. So small it barely looked like movement, but it was enough. Blassie's hand closed on empty space, and suddenly, Lee was no longer in front of him. But just to the side, Lee's right hand came up and lightly touched Blassie's chest. Not a punch, just a controlled, precise tap. Less than a second, Blassie stepped back, not because of force, but because his balance had been interrupted at exactly the wrong moment. He had been moving forward with full intent, and suddenly, the point he was moving toward wasn't there anymore. The timing was perfect. That small contact was enough. Blassie caught himself. His face changed slightly. More red now, the audience reacted, not cheering exactly, not gasping either. Something in between, the kind of sound you hear when something unexpected happens very quickly. Blassie came forward again, this time faster, more direct. He reached with both arms, trying to grab and control, the way he had done countless times before. But Lee was already moving. He shifted his weight back, turned slightly, and as Blassie reached forward, Lee's hand moved again. Fast. Precise. His left hand locked onto Blassie's wrist. That was the moment people remembered. A man over 200 pounds already in motion. And somehow, he couldn't pull his arm free. Blassie tried. He pulled harder, but his arm didn't move, and for a brief second, everything in the room felt completely still. The tendons in Blassie's forearm stood out sharply under his skin, tight like cables under pressure. He was pulling with real force, the kind that had bent chairs, controlled opponents, and dominated wrestling rings for years. And still, Bruce Lee's hand did not move, not even slightly. No shaking, no adjustment, no sign of strain. Lee held the wrist casually, almost the way someone rests a hand on a railing, as if the weight and strength pulling against him didn't matter at all. For a brief second, it looked almost unreal. Then Lee made a small movement, just a slight twist, maybe around 30 degrees. At the same time, he stepped gently to the outside of Blassie's body. The effect was immediate. Blassie's entire right side gave way, not because Lee overpowered him, but because the angle had changed everything. His wrist, elbow, shoulder, even his balance, all shifted into a position where resisting became impossible. The body simply couldn't respond. It wasn't strength anymore. It was control. Blassie dropped to one knee right there on a live television stage. In front of millions watching, and the sound that came from him wasn't the confident voice people were used to hearing. It was a short, involuntary reaction, the kind that happens when the body moves before the mind can catch up. Lee held him there. Witnesses later said it lasted only a few seconds, 3, maybe 5, but in that moment it felt longer. Bruce Lee stood there, holding a much larger man in place, without effort, without visible tension. It looked less like a struggle, and more like something already decided before it even began, and Lee's face didn't change. No anger. No pride. No satisfaction. Just calm focus. As if he already knew how it would end. Then, just as smoothly, he let go. At that exact moment, the director, Phil Larson, cut to commercial. The transition was sudden. 1 second, Blassie was on his knee. The next, the screen switched away. Larson later said he had been calling for the cut repeatedly before it finally happened. During the break, the studio stayed frozen in a kind of quiet confusion. Around 200 people had just seen something they couldn't fully explain, not because anyone told them to stay quiet, but because they were still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. One person later said, "I was sitting about 15 feet away. I saw everything. That smaller guy held his wrist, and he just couldn't move. Over 200 pounds. And he couldn't even pull his arm back. I still don't understand how that's possible." Blassie stood up slowly. He adjusted his jacket. His right wrist was slightly red, and he kept it close to his body, almost like he didn't want anyone to notice. Bruce Lee was standing a few feet away, exactly where the moment had ended. He hadn't moved. His posture was the same. His suit still neat. His hair still in place. He looked like someone who had just finished a quiet conversation. Not a confrontation. Blassie, on the other hand, was breathing heavier, his face still flushed, and he didn't look at Lee. Not. Even once, he turned and walked off the stage without saying anything. No glance at the host. No acknowledgement of the audience. Just firm, quick steps straight toward the exit, and that was it. The show didn't continue. It couldn't. Later, Dick Cavett would say the decision was obvious. You don't follow something like that. With small talk, the audience left quietly. 200 people who had come expecting a normal talk show walked out having seen something they couldn't fully describe. The crew began packing up. Lights were turned off. The bright stage slowly faded into the dull, flat look of overhead lighting. And suddenly, it was just a small studio again. Nothing special, just a room. Bruce Lee stayed on stage for a few minutes longer. He spoke briefly with Cavett. A camera operator nearby later remembered part of that exchange. Cavett said something like, "I've had many guests on this show, but I've never seen anything like that." Lee simply nodded. Calm. Almost like it was nothing unusual. Then he walked backstage. The hallway outside the dressing rooms was narrow. Plain. Fluorescent lights. Concrete floor, the kind of space viewers never see. Lee was putting on his jacket when he heard a door open behind him. He turned. Blassie was standing there. Now changed into simpler clothes. His wrist wrapped in a towel filled with ice. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. No words. No reaction. Just silence. Someone watching from down the hallway later said it was the quietest moment they had ever seen in a television studio. Not awkward. Not tense. Just still. Two men, both aware something had happened, but neither saying anything about it. Another crew member described Blassie's expression differently. Not empty. Not angry. He said Blassie looked like someone trying to understand something without having the pieces to figure it out. Blassie opened his mouth, then stopped, closed it, opened it again, but no words came out. Whatever he was about to say, he chose not to. Instead, he gave Bruce Lee a small nod, short, tight, the kind of nod a man gives when he understands something, but can't quite put it into words. Then he stepped back into his dressing room. The door closed quietly behind him. Bruce Lee remained in the hallway for a moment, still calm, still composed. Then he put on his jacket, turned, and walked out onto West 58th Street, disappearing into the cool October night like nothing unusual had happened at all. Within a week, the production office received 3 separate calls about that episode. 2 came from viewers on the East Coast, people who had seen the live broadcast and wanted to know if what they witnessed had been real or staged. The third call came from ABC's Internal Standards and Practices Department. That call lasted about 40 minutes. No official transcript was ever recorded. And after that, silence. The episode as it was originally seen in the studio never aired again. The West Coast version showed only the conversation. No physical moment, without those missing seconds. It felt like nothing more than a sharp but ordinary argument between 2 confident men. Those 14 seconds were gone. A 1979 article briefly mentioned the incident, describing it only as an unexpected onstage interaction between guests. Years later, a book on talk show history gave it just a couple of paragraphs, all based on secondhand stories. In the early 2000s, discussions started appearing online. Someone claimed to have a recorded copy. It was never shown. In 2004, a formal request was made for any existing footage. The reply came back simple. No materials found. And just like that, those 14 seconds remained lost. But the truth is, those 14 seconds were never really the point. What mattered was everything around them. 2 men walked onto the same stage, carrying 2 completely different ideas of strength. One believed strength came from size, power, years of dominance, and never backing down. The other believed strength came from control, from timing, from understanding when not to move at all for a brief moment. Those 2 ideas met. And the audience saw what happens when something solid meets something fluid. The solid stands firm, but the fluid finds a way through. Freddie Blassie continued his career for many years after that. He moved into managing, became widely respected, and was later honored in the WW Hall of Fame. He never spoke about that. Night directly, not once, not in interviews, not in his writings, not anywhere, but in a later interview, when asked about the toughest opponents he had ever faced. He mentioned several names, then paused, and added quietly, "There was a guy once, not a wrestler, who showed me something I didn't know existed. I never forgot it." When asked who he meant, he simply shook his head. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is what I learned." He paused again, then said, "Being tough and being strong aren't the same thing? I spent most of my life thinking they were." He never said the name. He didn't need to. Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong soon after, within a short time. He starred in The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon, becoming one of the most recognized martial artists in film history, then in 1973, at just 32 years old. He passed away. He never spoke about that night. Either not publicly, not even once. It was as if that moment didn't belong to history. But it wasn't something to explain either. Just a single evening, a quiet exchange, a brief encounter that didn't need words, and when he walked out into that October air, he left it there, because some things don't need explanation, they happen, they pass, and they stay only in memory, somewhere, on a tape that may or may not still exist. Those 14 seconds are still sitting, unseen, unreleased, for more than 50 years, but millions of people saw them once, and if you ask carefully, in the right places, you might still find someone who remembers. They'll tell you about the wrestler who wouldn't stop talking, and the martial artist who barely needed to. They'll tell you about the moment one of them stood up, and the other realized something had already changed, and then they'll pause because the most important part is the part they still can't fully describe. I've told this story only a few times in all these years. Most people don't believe it. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince them, but I was there, and I know what I saw.